Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to each of the witnesses for joining us today. The Bureau of Reclamation initiated its Record of Decision, or ROD, over the Glen Canyon Dam's Long-Term Experimental Management Plan Supplemental EIS this past summer. It was signed on July 5th, 2024, with implementation beginning just 3 days later on July 8th. Pretty quick. The ROD calls for higher flows at the dam to combat the presence of predatory smallmouth bass, which threaten the federally protected humpback chub. These higher flows bypass hydropower generators in order to cool the river temperature below the dam in an attempt to disrupt smallmouth bass downstream. While this ROD was well-intentioned, it comes at a very serious cost to communities and power customers. Due to the bypass requirements, the lost hydropower generation must be replaced with power purchased on the open market. The Western Area Power Administration, or WAPA, makes these purchases from the Upper Colorado River Basin Fund, which is funded by power revenues, or in other words, by the customers. WAPA has estimated the cost for this year's delivery to be $20 million more than it would have been without the bypass requirements. And going forward, it projects the impact on customers to be significantly more expensive in fiscal years 2025, 2026, and 2027. Respectively, we'd be looking at annual costs of $61 million, $62 million, and $74 million in each of those fiscal years. Again, to be paid for by the customers. The American people are fed up with these heavy-handed decisions made by the federal government that makes it increasingly difficult to get by in this country, particularly if you're trying to raise a family. This administration has contributed quite heavily to rising energy costs and, as a result, rising energy poverty. According to the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy at the University of Pennsylvania, more than 1/3 of U.S. households are experiencing energy poverty. And even the UN Development Project released a report this year arguing that an estimated 60% increase in people who lack access to electricity since 2020. That is simply unacceptable in a developed society. Meanwhile, the cost borne by utility companies has also gone up as the cost of producing and then delivering electricity continues to rise, oftentimes due to federal regulations. According to the Energy Information Administration and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, annual spending by major utilities to produce and deliver electricity increased 12% from $287 billion in 2003 to $320 billion in 2023. In just 20 years, such a dramatic increase, most of it connected to the global warming nonsense. While some of this is likely due to capital investment in electric infrastructure, these investments are of no use to customers if they aren't able to be utilized, a problem that we've seen throughout the West as radical environmentalists increasingly limit customer access to electricity generated by hydropower. It is important that we hold the administration's feet to the fire when it comes to taking action that impact energy prices. That's why this bill is important. My bill requires the Bureau of Reclamation to acknowledge the effect of the decision through a memorandum of understanding that measures the economic, environmental, and reliability impacts of the action. I'm grateful to have the support of Ms. Rosemary Henry, who is here representing the Wyoming Municipal Power Agency. I look forward to receiving her input and very grateful for her expertise and her advocacy for the people of the state of Wyoming and throughout the West who are affected by these wrong-headed decisions. Again, I'm grateful to have this opportunity to testify in support of this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and with that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Henry, thank you so much for your willingness to testify in support of this important legislation. My staff and I have deeply appreciated the opportunity to work with you on this issue, so thank you for all the good work that you've done for the folks in Wyoming. We both touched on this a little bit already, but I want to start by asking you about the cost burden on customers. WAPA has estimated the cost for this year's delivery to be $20 million more than it would have been without the bypass requirements. What if the Basin Fund were to be depleted? What is the worst case scenario for our ratepayers?
Well, assuming that the cost of the replacement power in total over the 4 years is $220 million, and assuming that WAPA were going to recover all of these costs and rates, WMPA's share would be about $900,000. We're a not-for-profit. That means that we have to pass those costs on to our municipalities. And as you know, the municipalities in the state of Wyoming are required by law to recover all the costs associated with its electric service. That would mean the 25,000 people that we serve and businesses of those municipalities would pay that cost. WMPA doesn't believe that it's fair to burden the ratepayers with non-power costs, especially of this magnitude.
You noted in your testimony that HR 9969 would help CRISP customers to collaborate with the federal agency. Could you elaborate on what this legislation would do for hydropower stakeholders?
Absolutely. The bill language specifically would require the agencies to create a plan to address both the challenges of the diminished hydropower production and the drawdown of the Basin Fund and the impacts on routine operations and maintenance and capital replacements. It also requires agencies to address grid reliability.
And can you talk a little bit about the uncertainty that this creates for customers when their access to reliable power is cut off during peak electricity demand?
Absolutely. The peak demand for electricity usually coincides with the hottest and coldest extreme weather. Customer usage cannot exceed the quantity of generation available. That's physics. When there is not enough generation available, rolling blackouts are required. And in terms of uncertainty, I think the initial uncertainty is how uncomfortable their homes begin and whether or not their food will remain at safe temperatures. However, there are some services that people may not attribute to water, such as, or to electricity, such as pumping the water and managing, say, the waste products that people produce, as well as traffic lights, those kind of municipal services that we think of.
Some of our biggest demands for electricity are actually hospitals, schools, and our industry. And another question that I have for you is, did the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, in coming up with this plan, did they actually do any kind of an analysis as to the environmental poverty that they were going to be creating as a result of bypassing these flows?
I think that they took a look at some of the grid reliability pieces that were out there, but in my opinion, I think the timing was maybe not well understood. It takes roughly an hour to swap between bypass and generation, and from an electrical grid perspective, what happens is we really have to respond instantaneously. And so in that situation, you can't just change your mind. And what happens if once load has come offline, it actually increases when you pick it back up. When it's really hot out, homes get hotter. Mm-hmm. So the truth is you can only pick up a few of them, and then by the time you can pick up the next one, you can't pick up all of them. That's actually what happened in Winter Storm. One of the things that happened in Winter Storm Uri is they thought they'd be able to roll it through and bring it on faster, but then when they picked someone up, it would actually take more power than they anticipated to pick it back up, and certainly it had very tragic results.
So the law of unintended consequences continues to rear its ugly head, I guess you would say.
Yes, ma'am.
Historically, why is the power generated at Glen Canyon Dam so essential?
So there are a number of reasons that it's essential, but one of it is that's about 70% of the CRISP power comes from the Glen Canyon Dam, so it's the largest of the resources. It also is, so hydropower is incredibly dispatchable. It's not frequency sensitive like other resources because the shaft size physically is so large in those hydropower generators. This makes it incredibly valuable for immediately responding to changes in load.
Well, again, Ms. Henry, I really want to thank you for your knowledge, your work on this issue. It's very important to Wyoming, but it's also important to the larger discussion that we're having. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.